Good afternoon, me hearties. Yes, and I'd like to welcome you to the ZSR Library Lecture Series event for today, and going from pirate talk to a talk about pirates, featuring our speaker for the day, Dr. David M. Lubin from the art department. Now, a few words about Dr. Lubin. He is the Charlotte C. Weber Professor of Art. He earned his BA in English at Ohio State University and his MA and PhD in American Studies at Yale University. His areas of expertise include American visual art, film history, and popular culture. He's received many, many fellowships and awards, including the Smithsonian Institution's Charles Eldridge Prize in 2004 for Outstanding Scholarship in American Art, their words. He's the author of 5 books, including Shooting Kennedy, JFK and the Culture of Images, with 1 book on the way, Grand Illusions, American Art and the First World War. He's the author of numerous articles and essays in a host of publications, including Art Forum, the Journal of American History, and Rolling Stone. He is a noted speaker, lecturer, and presenter who has appeared around the world, and his most recent appearances include an interview on All Things Considered in September about one sculptor's answer to World War I wounds, plaster, copper, and paint, and his recent lecture on Monday evening, Behind the Mask, World War I, Plastic Surgery, and the Modern Beauty Revolution. So without further ado, Dr. David Lubin.
Thank you very much, Chris. A couple announcements. We do have a witch in the audience today. This is, yes, Millie Heron deserves a great hand for never failing to terrorize most of the people in my department. And this afternoon when I walked in just to pick up a copy of my lecture, I unlocked the door of my office and opened it and shrieked because she was sitting in there doing that. And usually, you know, the people who work at this library know that I have like an astounding number of Z. Smith Reynolds books in my office. Most of them ended up in piles on the floor. And, I sometimes think there would not be enough room for the books in this library. So my office is off-site storage. And so usually I walk in the office, and the first thing I do when I open the door before I turn on the lights is just survey the, I don't want to say mess on the floor, but the piles, which are all somewhat strategically arranged, but also they have their own crazy logic. But so I as today, hello, welcome. So today, as I walk in to my office, as always, I just, first thing I do is I have to look at my books. I'm just sort of obsessive about looking at my books. So I look down, and all of a sudden I see these fingers waving at me, and I just jumped out of my skin. People like 2 buildings down heard my shouts. So it was really, yes. So Millie and anyway, I don't know that I can read my lecture with a patch on, but I can give it to the provost, maybe. So before I begin this lecture, there are a couple things I have to say. One of them is, to my great surprise and pleasure, Howard Pyle's great-granddaughter is sitting in the audience today. This lovely lady in Halloween orange came all the way over from Greensboro to hear this lecture. So, now I want to tell you how I got onto this material, because I think could be of interest to you. Before I begin my lecture proper, a few years ago, it was summertime, and I've been writing, as Chris Burr said, I've been working very hard for the last number of years on actually 2 books on the First World War. And so while I was doing this World War I research, if you're a researcher, you try not to lose your focus. You try to stay on task. Well, I'm never very good on staying on task, and somebody called me up from Delaware, the Delaware Art Museum, and said they were going to have a 100th anniversary exhibition of the work of Howard Pyle, their great artist illustrator who was from Delaware, and the museum he died in 1911, so it was going to be a 2011 exhibition. So they asked me if I would write an essay for the catalog. And somehow they knew that, I don't quite know how they figured this out, but that I love popular culture, and I loved, when I was a kid, I read all these books that were illustrated by Howard Pyle. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. But anyway, so I agreed to do it. My wife, who has great common sense, told me it was a bad idea. I stick with World War I. I would have my World War I books out of the way by now had I not accepted this and other invitations. But I couldn't resist because, and she said, God, you loved all those pirate movies when you were a kid. This is a great chance for you to think about those things. So I accepted the offer. I wrote an essay for the catalog. Then when the show was going to open in November 2011, they asked me if I would prepare a lecture for this. Well, now you would think if I've written an article on it, preparing a lecture would be simple. For me, it's not, because it involves a lot of AV, a lot of logistics, and there are a number of people in this room who helped me get this lecture together. And, for me, the Z. Smith Reynolds Library is a scholar's dream. I have had such a fabulous experience working in this library, and the people here are so good and so helpful and so eager to help me along. I'm the kind of kid, as a graduate student, I always thought librarians hated me, because whenever I went at Yale and other places, I'd go into a library and I'd ask what I thought was an innocent question, and the librarians always browbeat me and made me feel like really bad that I was coming in to use their materials. And so I thought, okay, that's what a librarian is supposed to be, sort of the guardian of the treasures that, speaking of Howard Pyle and all this, the guardian of the treasures who keeps this stuff out of other people's hands who might fumble with it and destroy it. So until I came to Wake Forest, I was pretty scared of librarians. And then, this is like an amazing group of people who just make it so fun to come into the library and do research. Charles and Mary over there will order films for me. The interlibrary loan has been fantastic. Just like anything that I have a need for, people right now, James in interlibrary loan is working on something for me, making these things available. So that and Martine Sherrill in the Visual Resources Library over at Scales. Martine and her staff will shoot any image. So many of the things you're going to see today were books that I borrowed or from my own comic book collection, which my mother always told me to get rid of, but I've saved all these things and many more. All right, so I guess that's enough of a preamble to let you know what you're in for, what kinds of things I'm going to be talking about. Please, Mary Beth, come in. Lock that door so no one else can. Okay. Well, now I'm not sure which slide I begin with. Okay. Hold on just 1 second. Okay, that's what. All right. Okay, now, ready? Okay. When I was growing up, we didn't have internet, smartphones, or video games. Our TV sets were small, black and white devices with only 3 channels, or a 4th if you counted the education station. Don't pity me, though. We got along with what we had. We played in the streets until we were called in for supper. We rode our bikes in packs. When friends weren't around to enjoy the thrill of mobility with us, we happily did so on our own. And when we were on our own and there was nothing good on TV, which was often the case then as now, we happily resorted to books and comic books. At least I did. That's when I discovered Howard Pyle. I did so via the Classics Illustrated version of Men in Iron, a novel he wrote and illustrated back in 1892. This dynamic cover image of a jousting knight was by an artist named Alex Bloom, and it originally appeared in 1951. I acquired my copy, which you see here, in January 1964. I bought it at my local soda shop, Wentz's Pharmacy, on Main Street in Bexley, Ohio, and relished reading it cover to cover while sitting at the counter and savoring a cherry-flavored Coke or strawberry phosphate. January 1964 was only a month or so after the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas. At a time when the term Camelot was on everyone's lips, action-filled comic books examining the brutal clashes and power struggles of knights in armor were anything but irrelevant to the broader political climate of the day in which two superpowers were poised to collide. I was also aware of Pyle through the reprinting of his books in inexpensive but sturdy paperback editions. At that time, Dover Press began issuing its line of children's books, and Pyle, long deceased, became one of its best-selling authors. Dover reprinted The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, which was first published in 1883, The Story of King Arthur and His Knights, originally published in 1903, and its 1905 sequel, The Story of the Champions of the Round Table, all books written by Pyle as well as illustrated by him. There were several other folktale collections and the strange juvenile novel Otto of the Silver Hand, about a medieval German boy whose hand is hacked off by an evil baron and eventually replaced by a silver prosthesis. Sometimes I encountered Pyle's work as I wandered through the stacks of my local public library, looking for exciting reading material, which for me often amounted to exciting viewing material. I found the diction of old-fashioned books ponderous, and the stories too clogged with description to hold my attention. But Pyle's illustrations, and those by similar artists, thrilled me with their proto-cinematic depictions of romance and adventure. Here I show you the cover of a posthumous compilation volume, which is in our library, entitled Howard Pyle's Book of Pirates, which was published in 1921, 10 years after his death. The picture beside it shows a Spanish galleon about to be raided by pirates. As the father of American book illustration, Howard Pyle, with his easily identifiable visual flair, provided boys like me endless fodder for the imagination, and I would assume some girls as well. Such books made me imagine myself as a fearsome pirate, a bone-crushing medieval knight, a cutlass-swinging revolutionary patriot, or some other type of heroic individualist garbed in old-time clothing. Anything, in fact, other than what I was, a skinny adolescent boy who wished the girls noticed him half as much as he noticed them. So you can see the name Howard Pyle registered with me for assorted reasons. The Classics Illustrated version of Men of Iron, which provided a prose biography of the author, the Dover editions of King Arthur and Robin Hood, and those musty old library books with their rousing color or black and white illustrations of epic adventure. I also knew of him indirectly by way of old movies on TV. Many of these films, as you will see in the course of my presentation, were inspired by Pyle and his vivid envisionings of the past. Let me give an example with more to come. Let me give an example now with more to come later. The 1935 Errol Flynn swashbuckler Captain Blood was based on a 1922 novel by the popular adventure writer Raphael Sabatini. The look of the film, however, is pure Pyle, as in the famous duel on the beach between Flynn as a pirate captain and his nemesis, played by Basil Rathbone. What you're looking at is a drawing by Pyle and a still from the film. So you can see there's a pretty direct correlation. The first time I saw this movie was on a Saturday night in the mid-1960s when my parents were going out for the evening. My dad, spotting it on in the TV listings, told me it had been his favorite film as a boy in the mid-1930s. It immediately became my favorite film, too. Looking back decades later, I can see how the movie might have meant one thing to viewers in the Great Depression, such as my dad, and another to young viewers such as me during a period of national prosperity. A tale of wealth circulation on global trade routes and an allegory of good leadership as embodied by Flynn versus bad leadership as embodied by Rathbone, the movie would have had one sort of meaning during the build-up to the Second World War and another different meaning at the height of the Cold War. You follow this? Flynn and his pirates were essentially democratic, freedom-loving good guys who plundered the ill-gotten gains of despots and redistributed them equitably. A few years later, at the turbulent close of the 60s, I still regarded Captain Blood as one of my favorite movies. Only now I tended to view Flynn and his men as rebellious hippies with swords, or as the 17th century equivalent of rock and rollers with guitars. Here's Captain Blood in the riggings of his pirate ship and the protest singer-songwriter Country Joe McDonald on stage at Woodstock. Pyle's greatest influence on American popular culture may have been in the imaginary realm of pirates and piracy, but he also set his stamp on the way we have come to think of legendary figures such as Robin Hood, King Arthur, and medieval knights. In each case, these figures are cultural archetypes that, for better or worse, encourage us to imagine our collective past in ways that shape our collective future. Let us see how this works, first with Robin Hood and then with pirates. Robin Hood ballads of various types and shapes had been around for centuries, long before Howard Pyle gathered them into a single unified prose whole. The Robin Hood of English folklore had been a wily and violent thief, but Pyle, among other modernizers, converted him into a 12th century hero and do-gooder, still wily, but now violent only in his fight against injustice. And even then, Pyle, writing for children, kept the violence minimal. Thanks largely to Howard Pyle, Robin Hood became a beloved literary creation, a staple of the Victorian and Edwardian nursery, and from thence he leapt onto the stage of American mass culture. In 1922, Douglas Fairbanks, Hollywood's most popular leading man, loosely adapted Pyle's novelistic telling of the tale, as well as other accounts, to bring Robin Hood to the silent screen. True to Fairbanks especially as a phenomenal acrobat, Robin Hood in this movie accomplishes amazing feats of gravity defiance, as for example, in a scene in which he, or his stunt double, leaps onto a closing drawbridge and scampers up an immense height to gain entrance to the castle in which Maid Marian is imprisoned. Okay, are you psyched to see this scene from the film now? Okay. It's incredible. I would love to show this to you again, but I have to keep moving. But it's just the way that Douglas Fairbanks works with scale and has these sort of immense heights and this figure. I mean, he was sort of unbelievable. We don't have people like that anymore. Here in an earlier scene in the movie, Robin provides welfare for the poor and needy. This is surprisingly liberal behavior to find in a movie made shortly after the Red Scares of the early 1920s, during the conservative Warren G. Harding era, when the gap between rich and poor in America was the greatest it had been in decades, and the notion of Social Security lay far in the future. Of course, Fairbanks' Robin is rather naive in his approach to economic distribution. He flings coins at people and hands infant children bags of gold. So here's, whoops, go backward, go back. Okay, Robin in action. He's a philanthropist who dances while he gets his... Can you all see from where you're? Okay, try not to block your vision. Okay, Fairbanks' Robin Hood, however animated, offers little in the way of personality. He smiles and grins a lot, but that's not enough to bring the legend to life. The next screen Robin Hood did a much better job of this. In 1938, the hero of Sherwood Forest was incarnated by the devilishly handsome Errol Flynn, who, in addition to being a superb swordsman, lit up the screen with charisma. He epitomizes the merry in Merry Men. His smile is dazzling, his laugh captivating. Compared to Fairbanks, he radiates warmth and humanity. No matter how serious the scrape Flynn's Robin finds himself in, he emits joy. When Warner Brothers produced The Adventures of Robin Hood, Americans were still in the throes of the Great Depression. Another world war was on the horizon. And here was Flynn's unstoppable Robin Hood, taking and giving enormous pleasure in his acts of death defiance. A generation or two later, when I and millions of other young Americans were watching old Flynn movies on TV, his jolly good nature had a wonderfully bracing effect on us, offsetting our worries about nuclear war, juvenile delinquency, and teenage acne. Pyle's Robin Hood is not nearly so jaunty and happy-go-lucky as Flynn's. I don't think I have a clip here. No, I don't. Nonetheless, Pyle's Robin is indeed merry, as are the good, stout fighting men with whom he surrounds himself. Here is Pyle's verbal description of Friar Tuck. Quote, "Beneath his bushy black brows danced a pair of little gray eyes that could not stand still for very drollery and of humor. No man could look into his face and not feel his heartstrings tickled by the merriment of their look." Now here's Pyle's pen-and-ink drawing of Robin crossing a stream on the friar's back. With its beautiful decorative border, it calls to mind illuminated manuscripts, but also the neo-medieval aesthetic of pre-Raphaelite artists who preceded Pyle by a generation, and the arts and crafts designers such as William Morris, who were his contemporaries. Now, here's the 1957 Classics Illustrated adaptation of Pyle, which I acquired in the early 1960s. I have right there. Placing its Friar Tuck beside Pyle's, we can see how the comic book artist, true to his medium, adds color and subtracts line, texture, and detail to make the visual information easier to grasp. See? Okay. I suspect that the comic book artist was influenced as much by Errol Flynn as Howard Pyle. Here's the corresponding scene from the Flynn film. So we got the comic book on either side, and now I'll show you a clip from the Errol Flynn movie, directed by Michael Curtiz.
Staff, I'll have a gallop from you yet.
I particularly like Pyle's drawing of Robin Hood's first encounter with Little John, who has knocked his young adversary into the water. An iris with a dragonfly at its base fills the decorative outer panel. In the inner panel, the tall yeoman with a plumed cap peers down from a log bridge into the pond where bedraggled and bemused Robin floats amid water lilies. This is a delicious illustration, full of rhythmic visual echoes. A palpable breeze stirs the water, bends the reeds at the water's edge, and activates the windmill, the tall trees, and the billowing clouds in the background. The narrow plume in Little John's cap reaches out in the direction of the curling iris leaf in the outer panel, joining together the separate sections of the image in organic harmony. Now, for Errol Flynn's take on this famous encounter.
There's something on account. There's your change.
It would be great to have somebody knock you off a log and just, laugh out about it like that. We all get knocked off logs all the time. So. Okay, and now, to continue the comparison, here's the Classics Illustrated version. Note how cinematic it is. In the cell on the upper left, we are positioned from below, looking at the two fighters as if with a low-angle camera shot. The text reads, "He gave the stranger a blow that could have felled 3 men." The next cell is a close-up of Little John, who laughingly taunts Robin, "Thou dost tickle me with thy playing." The bottom cell is a wide-angle action shot with the camera, so to speak, half submerged in the water to catch Robin Hood as he hurls backward into our space. It's straight out of Cinerama, the 3-projector overlapping image widescreen photographic process that was the forerunner of today's IMAX. It was introduced by Hollywood in the early 1950s in an effort to keep audiences going to movies rather than staying home in front of their TVs. You're looking at a "you are there, you are right there" shot from This Is Cinerama, made in 1952. If we look at a recent depiction of Robin's first encounter with Little John, Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves from 1991. I realize 1991 is no longer that recent, but it seems like yesterday to me. We see that the director probably borrowed as much from Classics Illustrated as from Pyle or Flynn. Costner's Robin Hood, by the way, is as much a part of his time as respectively Pyle's and Flynn's Robin Hoods were of theirs. Released shortly after the First Gulf War, it portrays Robin as a battle-hardened veteran of a messy conflict in the Middle East known as the Crusades. Okay, so here's the Costner version, directed by Kevin Reynolds. So they kind of amped it up by having him fall a further distance and more people watching. In 1993, director Mel Brooks spoofed the legendary hero in his comedy Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Brooks aimed satirical arrows at Pyle, Fairbanks, or Flynn, to be sure, but most of all at Kevin Costner, as can be seen in this pairing of advertising posters. Pyle differs essentially from all the popular culture versions we've been examining, not only in visual style, but also in gravity and tone. Unlike the later versions, his ends in elegiac sadness. He dares to recount the death of Robin Hood. The last full-page illustration in the book shows Robin, haggard and worn, sitting up on his deathbed to fire one last arrow through an open window. Where it lands, that is where he wishes to be buried. Little John, his face darkened with grief, cradles his friend and master. Pyle details the wood grain of the wall and mantelpiece and the leading of the window, but leaves the planks of the floor and folds of the bedclothes almost empty of line. This emptiness provides a foretaste of the void the Robin's death will leave. Now let's compare Pyle's pen and ink drawing of pen and ink account of Robin's demise to the 1917 oil painting by Pyle's most gifted student, N.C. Wyeth, a great illustrator in his own right. Wyeth's rendition is certainly beautiful, but I find it sweeter and more sentimental than Pyle's, less completely attuned to the loneliness and gravity of approaching mortality. In the early 1950s, there was a new surge of interest in Robin Hood. In 1952, Walt Disney released The Story of Robin Hood and His Merry Men, with Richard Todd as Robin and Peter Finch as the Sheriff of Nottingham. It was broadcast in 2 weekly installments on Disney's Wonderful World of Color in 1955. Some of us were there for that. A comic book adaptation tied in with the film's theatrical release appeared in 1962, and that's in my collection. I'm sure the rare books room at C. Smith Reynolds would really like my comic book collection when I part. So we'll have to, negotiate that. The half-hour TV series, The Adventures of Robin Hood, produced for British television but broadcast in the United States as well, ran for 4 seasons, from 1955 to 1960. Its most memorable feature was the rousing song that closed every episode and became the anthem of those who would later be known as the Woodstock generation. Rather than sing it to you, which would be scarier than Millie's costume, I will play the audio file. If I can.
Robin Hood with his band of men, feared by the bad, loved by the good. Robin Hood, Robin Hood, Robin Hood.
Does it make you want to go out and protest war? And I kind of missed I cut out. I'm just going to play the beginning because I kind of missed the beginning. How do I do this? Okay, let's just. You got to hear that little trumpet at the beginning.
Robin Hood, riding through the glen. Robin Hood, with his band of men, feared by the bad, loved by the good. Robin Hood, Robin Hood, Robin Hood.
This formed me. This is how I became a professor at Wake Forest, I wanted to, join the merry band of C. Smith Reynolds librarians. Okay, now how did he get in here? What's most intriguing about the Robin Hood revival of the early 50s is that it occurred during a period of great political tension dominated by this man, Senator Joseph McCarthy. The Cold War was at its peak, and the entertainment industry was under duress by anti-communists in Washington and elsewhere who sought to purge American film and television of any possible taint of socialism. Yet here was Robin Hood, a man of the people who fostered class warfare by stealing from the rich to give to the poor, and who lived with his cohort in an egalitarian, non-hierarchical, non-capitalistic communal harmony. One wonders what the senator from Wisconsin would have thought of Robin and his band. Make no mistake, and this is thanks to Peter Bromanoff, I have this following clip. Make no mistake, Hollywood wasn't entirely pink. And not all of its best-known stars embraced or even paid lip service to the Hollywood ethos, as we see in this next snippet.
Yeah, I know. Robin Hood will soon be here. He robs from the rich and he gives to the poor. Yo-ho, we go skipping tra-la through Sherwood Forest, helping the needy and the oppressed. You've been saying that through the whole picture. Well, where is he?
I'm sorry, I got to share that again, because I really like seeing it.
Yeah, I know. Robin Hood will soon be here. He robs from the rich and he gives to the poor. Yo-ho, we go skipping tra-la through Sherwood Forest, helping the needy and the oppressed. You've been saying that through the whole picture. Well, where is he?
Okay, I got to keep moving. All right. 3/4 of a century earlier, Pyle had not shied away from the traditional view of Robin Hood as a wealth distributor. He tells us that Robin and his men, vowed that even as they themselves had been despoiled, they would despoil their oppressors, whether baron, abbot, knight, or squire, and that from each they would take that which had been wrung from the poor by unjust taxes or land rents or wrongful fines. Thanks to Robin's illegal activities, Pyle says, quote, money and food came in time of want to many a poor family. The merry adventures of Robin Hood, Pyle's version, appeared at the height of the Gilded Age. This was a time, as never before in American history, of enormous disparities between privileged and poor, or to put it in appropriately metaphoric terms, between robber barons and the benighted farmers, peasants, and immigrants who comprise the vast majority of the American population. When Pyle published Robin Hood at age 30, he was still young and hungry. Perhaps he identified with the poor, having undergone near poverty as a fledgling artist in New York. Later, when Pyle became rich and famous and began to count politicians, robber barons, and captains of industry among his friends, he became fascinated with pirates and piracy, and the so-called golden age of piracy became his recurring theme. He authored and illustrated a number of books and stories about pirates. As I mentioned earlier, a compilation volume, Howard Pyle's Book of Pirates, published 10 years after his death, sparked new interest in the art of the legendary illustrator. One influential fan was the Hollywood legend Douglas Fairbanks, whom we have already seen as Robin Hood. In 1926, Fairbanks converted his admiration of Pyle's Book of Pirates into a feature-length adventure film, The Black Pirate, which he wrote under a pseudonym and co-produced. He also played the title role while performing his own stunts. It's an excellent adventure film and holds the distinction of being the first full-length feature shot in Technicolor. The advertising poster for the film, which you see on the left, borrowed from various Pyle images, such as his 1905 painting, An Attack on the Galleon, seen on the right. The box office success of The Black Pirate led to a succession of pirate-themed movies over the next quarter of a century. One way or another, all of them derive from Pyle. Let me remind you of some of the most famous of these. Reading clockwise from upper left are the 1934 MGM production of Treasure Island, Warner Brothers' 1935 Captain Blood, Disney's 1950 remake of Treasure Island, which was the studio's first full-length live-action film, and Peter Pan, released by Disney in 1953. Pyle's influence extended beyond the realm of movies and comics. In 1967, the Disney Corporation, drawing heavily on Pyle, introduced Pirates of the Caribbean, an indoor water ride with animatronic figures costumed as pirates. It was a great hit And years later, it spawned the Pirates of the Caribbean film franchise starring Johnny Depp. Pyle, this is to say, invented our present-day image of the pirate. Earlier representations of pirates were generally stiff, colorless, and static. Pyle veered away from these bare-bones representations by adding color, dynamic energy, and vividly rendered settings. So compare this 1724 drawing of Blackbeard with Pyle's 1907 depiction of a fictional pirate captain planting his booted foot on a steeply canted deck. Pyle's image has far more life and movement to it. The perspectival lines of the aft deck direct the viewer's eyes beyond the captain to the roiling sea, where a distressed galleon churns heavy smoke. The smoke clouds rhyme visually with the Baroque turnings of the ship's railing and the folds of the skull and crossbones draped by the captain's head. Made at a time when motion pictures were still in their infancy, Pyle's painting anticipated by years, if not decades, the capacity of movies to portray pirates with elaborate costumes and sets, fully realized seagoing environments, action on multiple planes, dramatic coloring, and intensity of psychological expression. All to say, again, that the Pyle was there before the movies, and that's why I think the movies latched onto him so avidly. The Pyle self-consciously sought to avoid stereotype in his illustrations, allows his work at its best to offer fresh perspectives on old material. A curator at the Delaware Art Museum, where the majority of Pyle's pirate paintings and drawings are located, has told me that the filmmakers for Pirates of the Caribbean drew heavily on the museum's collection when conceiving sets and costumes for the series. Now here's a clip from the first film in the series, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Black Pearl, released in 2003. As you will see, it's not only in costume and set that it borrows from Pyle, but also in terms of the dynamic motion and inherent drama that gave life to the best of his pirate images. This has to be loud. We have good volume? Okay. Straight and Pyle. Sort of hated to end it there because it's like great to see him go down, but I'm just going to do it again. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay. Now let's return to the first of the Pyle-derived pirate movies, The Black Pirate. Its most famous moment occurs when the title character, after single-handedly capturing an enemy ship, makes a rapid yet graceful descent from the heights of a mast by plunging his dagger into the canvas of a breeze-filled sail and riding the knife down to the deck below. So here's Douglas Fairbanks doing this famous stunt. Have you ever seen Singing in the Rain? Yeah, it means Gene Kelly's character is based on Fairbanks. This is a spectacular stunt, rich in symbolic overtones, showing the self-reliant individual taming the surging power of technology, epitomized here by the 18th century sail. Pyle, on the other hand, refused his pirates, whether heroes or villains, such unmitigated control of their environment. In this regard, his pirates are the antithesis of what Hollywood later envisioned. Excuse me. As often as not, they are victims of a hostile environment, not its supreme masters. The dour view of existence, in which a cruel universe torments poor, suffering humanity with its perverse indifference, found powerful expression in the work of the literary naturalists Stephen Crane, I should keep speaking to the mic, Theodore Dreiser, and Frank Norris. I believe it emerges from Pyle's work as well. Take, for example, Marooned, an illustration he made for Harper's Monthly in 1887. It shows a lone figure sitting hunched over a desolate strip of beach. He seems resigned to his fate, death by thirst or starvation, if not from the madness of endless solitude. In The Black Pirate, Fairbanks is also marooned, as seen in the following clip. Make no mistake, the marooner's dejection is only momentary. In the very next scene, Fairbanks' swashbuckling individualist springs into action. When the bad pirates land on this desert island to bury their treasure, he takes them on without an ounce of hesitancy or fear, fights a duel with their chief, kills him, and immediately takes over leadership of their band. So he's like the American can-do individualist, supreme. In 1909, 2 years before his death, Pyle painted a new version of Marooned. Despite its golden hue, it's darker, lonelier, and more despairing than the earlier version. He eliminates the bottle from which the marooned pirate might drink or even send a call for help, and he increases the expanse of sand, reduces the size of the figure, and places him on the horizon line, making him appear that much more remote from human contact. Further darkening the mood is the sky. No longer clear and unthreatening as in the magazine image, it now palpitates with clouds. A flock of birds wheeling about in the heights taunts the beach sailor with the freedom of mobility he so sadly lacks. Pyle's later version of Marooned, the 1909 painting, the one we're looking at here, is starkly modern compared to the earlier version or to the passage we've seen in Fairbanks's film. The painting's vast horizontal vista, inhabited by a sole diminutive figure, set off asymmetrically to the side, calls to mind the desolate widescreen compositions of cinematic masters such as Michelangelo Antonioni, Stanley Kubrick, and David Lean. Here we see a still from Lean's magnificent 1962 desert epic Lawrence of Arabia. Make no mistake, I am not claiming that David Lean and the other epic filmmakers of the 1960s were looking at Pyle, but only that Pyle, half a century earlier, had grasped the psychological potential of widescreen composition. Pyle's pirates should never be taken literally, that is, non-metaphorically. They are always more than simply pirates. Consider these two depictions of duels in the sand. The hero of the one on the left, his back to the viewer, has made a bid to replace the captain of a band of pirates. Onlookers study the engagement with grim concern, for they must accept as leader whoever proves stronger and more ruthless. In the painting on the right, two knife-wielding pirates embrace in a death struggle under the setting sun, while the crew looks on intently, for again, their own survival depends on that of the fitter or more devious of the combatants. Here's Fairbanks's version of the duel in the sand, showing him eliminate the pirate captain I spoke of earlier. gets ready to go. Puts a sword down. That was a kind of artful way to dispose of your enemy. These pictures allegorize the take it the right way? I hope so. These pictures allegorize the social Darwinist philosophy of the Gilded Age. Life is a dog-eat-dog affair, an unending struggle for limited resources, a relentless competition in which only the fittest and boldest survive, and only for a limited time before they too must succumb. Pyle appreciated the irony that his fame was based on depictions of scallywags and scoundrels, brigands and thieves, social outcasts and violent aggressors. He had a sense of humor about this duality, pointing out the oddity that he, quote, called himself a Quaker gentleman in the farmlands of Pennsylvania, should devote such ardent attention to men of the past who epitomized lawlessness and greed. What he admired about the pirate, he said, was that, quote, he knew his own mind and what he wanted. In other words, be finished here, I'll give you a little warning because I know a couple people have to leave. In other words, Pyle saw pirates as decisive men of action, which by all accounts he was as well. Like many of his generation, he seems to have regarded pirates as spiritual forefathers, figures to be emulated, within reason of course, for their transgression of repressive social norms. In photographer Edward Steichen's famous 1903 portrait of America's most feared financier, J.P. Morgan, the analogy between capitalist and pirate was explicit, so much so that Morgan despised the photograph and refused to accept it. With good reason, too, for it makes it seem as though he's clutching a knife in his fist. Do you all see the knife in his hand? In this, he's like the combatants of one of Pyle's death struggles on the sand, except in Morgan's case, it's not really a blade he holds in his hand, but rather a chair handle gleaming in the light. Over the decades, Pyle's themes have found their way into other types of films besides pirate movies. The atavistic lust for gold depicted in So the Treasure Was Divided returned with a vengeance in Erich von Stroheim's 1924 silent classic Greed, shown here on the left, and in the 1948 Humphrey Bogart saga of greed and betrayal, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. In Oliver Stone's 1987 hit film Wall Street, Gordon Gekko, played by Michael Douglas as a corporate raider in an Armani suit, proudly proclaims greed is good, thus providing a catchphrase that in Reagan-era America was both reviled and admired. More recently, Hollywood has turned out a spate of movies about high-finance deception and piracy, with movies such as Michael Clayton, Duplicity, The Informant, Margin Call, and most notably, The Social Network. Action movies of the past 30 years have also drawn on the pirate archetype, whether as good guys or bad, including The Wild Bunch, Star Wars, Waterworld, and Gangs of New York, to name but a few, in which powerfully self-reliant heroes or anti-heroes take charge of marauding gangs in lawless times through sheer force of will. Here, alongside of one of Pyle's buccaneers, is young Mel Gibson in an early starring role as a futuristic land pirate known as the Road Warrior. Piracy remains with us today, literally so, as described in this recent cover story in the New York Times Magazine, but also figuratively, as in this New Yorker cartoon, quote, "We should make it past the rocks by nightfall, provided our luck holds," says the pirate leader, who clearly has not had a very good run of luck, suggesting that there's little we can do to avoid the hard times ahead. We live in a new Gilded Age. Knaves are everywhere. We seek Robin Hood. We long for King Arthur. We hope for pirate captains who will lead us past the rocks. Pyle's time has come again. Thank you. Thank you. and I made it by 5 o'clock. So, okay. So I really, people probably have to go out and start their trick-or-treating early, but I'm happy to stay here and respond to questions or comments as well. Do you think your great-grandfather would have approved, or? Good.
So it's interesting to trace this Pyle influence theme of visual piracy in film and comic as you have done.
Bye, Brian.
And I quite like the notion that each page conjures up its own version of Pyle's images, but puts their own interpretation of them. Just wondering what you make. The Time story anticipates this, but the two most recent powerful films about piracy, Captain Phillips, and then the less known but very powerful Dutch film nominated for the Foreign Film Academy Award last year, Negotiation, which feature nothing like heroic figures, but roving bands of half-human Somalis terrorizing, post 9/11, mostly Tom Hanks-like do-good figures. And I'm just curious if we've lost the thread entirely, or there's still and taken a 180-degree turn, or there's still some way in which our most recent avatars of piracy still fit this marvelous theme stretching back 100 years before.
Well, that's a great question. As I mentioned, I'd written this in 2011, so it was before Captain Phillips. I haven't seen the Negotiation, but I thought that Captain Phillips was a pretty great film. And the reason to me that film was so powerful, I don't know how many of you have seen it. I'm sure the library has it. You might be able to borrow a copy from Mary Reeves there. But that the Tom Hanks character is captain of a Maersk liner, big container ship. They're taken over by these Somali pirates. The Somali pirates are shown as desperate men who have such terrible things happening back home that this is an act of sort of Darwinian survival for them. They're not doing this because they're bad guys, melodramatic 1920s type of villains. These are the movie establishes right from the beginning. These are desperate people whose families are facing starvation, who are being terrorized by warlords. The movie definitely doesn't justify them, but it sort of gives you a backstory to what these guys do, and then they grab, what's the cliche? I mean, they sort of grab the tiger by the tail, and they can't let go. And so as the movie progresses, you have all the powers of the First World War, superpower, America, bearing down on these guys. And you feel a sympathy. The actor who played the main pirate was nominated for an Oscar. He was like pretty fantastic. He was a limousine driver in Minneapolis when he got this part. But he makes you feel so much this guy's desire to have some agency in the world and how terrified he is of what's coming down on him through the forces of the industrialized First World. So I would say that at least that movie is taking the themes that Pyle deals with about disparities between wealthy and poor, social Darwinism, the conflicts at large in the world, and sort of encapsulates it. So I would say that the pirate theme is still richly productive for us. Charles. Yeah, he was definitely looking at Japanese art, at pre-Raphaelite painting, at the arts and crafts movement, artists who were taking, at least the latter two, the pre-Raphaelites and the arts and crafts movement, were going back to medieval sources or pre-Renaissance sources and trying to rehabilitate them, to take, instead of sort of classic high art Renaissance painting, which is very stable and balanced and pyramidal, and everything is sort of even and balanced. You think of the paintings of Raphael. These artists wanted to go back before that, where things seemed a little more raw and difficult and full of this kind of almost nervous energy. But as you're right, also definitely there was a high influence of Japanese Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the things for me as an art historian that's so interesting is that Pyle is not part of the canon of great American artists because he was working primarily as an illustrator and a commercial illustrator at that. And so for a lot of people traditionally that disqualified him from being seen as an artist. And yet, you know, as I hope my lecture demonstrated, as your comment suggests, he had a phenomenal graphic sensibility. Jennifer, would you care to comment on this as a... That's a good answer. I mean, that's helpful. Yeah, I mean, Pyle, I think, sort of fit very nicely into the new art form of cinema because he had this dramatic sensibility, and as Jennifer was saying, an ability to get viewers to empathize with or identify with his protagonists, even with his antagonists. But he had this great dramatic sensibility, and apparently, as a teacher, he was just a phenomenal teacher who really got his students impassioned by the subject matter. And what he would do, he would haunt antique stores. He would try to find old props and costumes and keep them in his studio. And then if, you know, one of his students was going to do a Revolutionary War scene, Pyle would give him a costume and say, you got to dress up on this. If you want to understand what it was like to live in that time and dress that way, wear the clothing, get a feel of it. So in a sense, I think he was like a method actor or method teacher, director at the time.
How many did he spawn? Maxwell Parrish was one of them?
I can't remember if Parrish worked with him or not. I probably did, but I don't know if there's still. There probably are schools that are derived from that. I mean, if you in the history of contemporary illustration, yeah. So I mean, I've looked at books on. There's museums of illustration now, and sort of contemporary histories of modern illustration. And Pyle is always referred to, and is always sort of the teacher of the teacher of the teacher of a present day student. When I, when I first gave this lecture, somebody from Washington University, who was one of the heads of the art school at Washington University, had come out to Wilmington for this presentation, or for the opening. I mean, he wasn't coming just to hear me, but he said Pyle has a great influence on their teaching back in St. Louis of illustration. And so, yeah, the legacy certainly lives on. His wasn't called the Brandywine School. I think the Brandywine School is now used generally to refer to the Wyeth family and Pyle and other artists who worked there. But he did have a school. I forget what it was called. Maybe it was called the Howard Pyle School of Illustration. But he also taught in Philadelphia at Drexel for a while, and then he moved to. There's like one thing about doing research. When you move on to another project, you kind of delete that disc and you forget a lot of empty that part of the disc. But in any case, I love the thought of Pyle sitting there with his students, and he had female students too. Some of the leading female illustrators sitting around on the beach in Rehoboth or whatever it's called on the shore in Delaware, and taking out these cutlass swords and fighting with each other. And I sort of love the idea, because a sword and a paintbrush or a pen have certain visual similarities. And I sort of imagine that they would enact these duels with swords, but they were also dueling with each other to see who could do the best illustration of some action. Am I getting the signal? Am I getting the hook? Yeah.
We'll have to
Cut this short.
But thank you very much, Dr. Lubin, for today's lecture.
Thank you.
If anyone did not get an eye patch and would like one, I have some right here. But we look forward to you at our next library lecture, which will be a gallery talk at Renova House in November. So please come out for that if you can. Thank you very much.
And you could take 2 eye patches and use them as eye shades, you know, when you're on an airplane or something. Hey, Rogan, thank you for coming.
Oh, my goodness, this is magnificent.
Oh.
Eye patch back.
Okay. I was wondering where it went. Yeah.